They say fear is universal. Every species in the galaxy knows it, feels it, runs from it.
I believe that too, until I met the humans. Until I saw what they called Tuesday. My name is Zethrak, and was a xenobiologist for the Galactic Coalition. I spent my career studying the most dangerous predators across 17 star systems. I've cataloged the hunting patterns of the void stalkers of Kepler.
442b documented the pack behavior of the crystalline devourers on Proxima 7 and survived close encounters with creatures that would make your worst nightmares seem like pleasant dreams. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared me for humanity. They don't look dangerous. Standing barely 2 meters tall on average, with soft skin, blunt teeth, and no natural weapons to speak of. When first contact was established, every military strategist in the coalition dismissed them as a minor species, perhaps useful for trade, maybe as laborers, but certainly not as equals in the great dance of galactic politics. We were so catastrophically wrong. I learned this during what humans call the Terran integration period, 6 months when selected coalition members were embedded with human communities to facilitate cultural exchange. I volunteered, thinking it would be an easy assignment, a chance to study fascinating but harmless creatures while advancing my career. Instead, I discovered that we had been living in a universe of children, playing at being adults, until the day the real monsters decided to introduce themselves. And the most terrifying thing about these monsters, they called themselves the good guys. This is the story of how I learned that standing with humans doesn't make you brave. It makes you realize that everything you thought you knew about terror was just the opening act. The transport ship Harmony's voice dropped me off at the human colony of New Geneva with all the ceremony of a mail delivery. Captain Vorlax, a Kytherian like myself, barely looked up from his navigational charts as I gathered my research equipment. 6 months with the humans, he said, mandibles clicking in what I now recognize was nervous laughter. Try not to let them corrupt you with their weird customs, Zethrak. I hear they actually eat plants that burn their mouths for pleasure. I hefted my bioscanner and atmospheric analyzer, standard equipment for any xenobiologist worth their ionic crystals. They're just another species, Captain. Fascinating, perhaps, but still bound by the same biological limitations as the rest of us. How naive those words sound now. New Geneva sprawled across a valley between rust-colored mountains, a collection of domed habitats and prefabricated structures that looked unremarkable compared to the soaring crystal cities of Kytherian space or the living architecture of the Verdanian homeworld. But as our shuttle descended, something felt different about this place. The settlement seemed to pulse with an energy I couldn't identify, a restlessness that made my sensory tendrils twitch. My first indication that I had entered a different kind of reality came when we landed at the spaceport. The human assigned as my liaison was waiting on the tarmac, and she was small even by human standards. Dr. Sarah Chen stood perhaps 1.5 meters tall, with the soft features and slight build that characterized her species. She wore simple civilian clothes and carried nothing more threatening than a data pad. Dr. Zethrak, she said, extending her hand in the curious human gesture called a handshake. Her grip was firm but gentle. Welcome to New Geneva. I'm looking forward to working with you. I studied her with my secondary eyes while maintaining polite contact with my primary ones. No visible weapons, no defensive modifications, no signs of the enhanced reflexes or combat conditioning I'd observed in other species. Yet something about her posture suggested a confidence that seemed disproportionate to her apparent capabilities. Thank you, Dr. Chen. I'm eager to begin my cultural observations. I understand this colony represents a typical human settlement. Her smile was warm, but I caught something else in her expression. Amusement, perhaps? Typical? Well, New Geneva is pretty standard, I suppose. Though we've had some unusual challenges lately. She led me through the spaceport past other humans going about their daily business. I activated my bioscanner discreetly, taking baseline readings.
Heart rate patterns, stress hormone levels, threat assessment behaviors, all the data points that would help me understand their social dynamics. The readings were confusing. These humans showed virtually no signs of the hypervigilance I'd observed in other sentient species. They walked with relaxed gaits, made casual physical contact with strangers, and displayed none of the defensive clustering behavior that marked civilization throughout the galaxy.
It was as if they had never developed proper survival instincts.
Your colony seems remarkably peaceful, I observed as we passed a group of human children playing some sort of pursuit game, shrieking with what appeared to be joy rather than terror. Do you have effective predator control measures? Predator control? Doctor control. Doctor control. Chen paused, then laughed. A sound that made several other humans turn and smile in response. Oh, you mean the local wildlife? Not really a problem. The biggest predators on this world are about the size of your average house cat. Nothing we can't handle. This struck me as odd.
In my experience, colonization efforts required extensive terraforming and ecosystem management to deal with indigenous threats.
Yet these humans seem to have simply settled down and gotten comfortable. We reached her vehicle. Another surprise.
It was an open-topped conveyance with minimal armor and no visible weapon systems.
Dr. Chen noticed my hesitation. Something wrong? This transport appears to lack basic defensive capabilities. Defensive against what? I gestured broadly.
Aerial predators, hostile environmental conditions, attacks from rival settlements. She was quiet for a moment, and when she spoke her tone had shifted slightly. Still friendly, but with an undertone I couldn't quite identify.
Dr. Zethrak, when was the last time your species experienced genuine warfare? The question caught me off guard. The Third Kytherian conflict ended approximately 200 of your years ago. Since then, we've maintained peace through the standard galactic protocols, territorial agreements, resource-sharing arrangements, mutual defense treaties. She started the vehicle's engine, a surprisingly quiet hum. And before that conflict, how long it had been? Perhaps 300 years? The second conflict was quite devastating. Nearly 40,000 casualties across both sides. Dr. Chen was quiet during the drive through New Geneva's outskirts, but I could see her processing something. The settlement was larger than I'd initially realized, with residential areas, manufacturing districts, and extensive agricultural zones. Everything looked peaceful, prosperous, and utterly vulnerable. We passed what appeared to be a school, where human children were engaged in some sort of organized physical activity. They were running, jumping, and tackling each other with what seemed like reckless abandon. Several were bleeding from minor injuries, but instead of seeking immediate medical attention, they simply continued playing. Dr. Chen, shouldn't those juveniles receive treatment for their wounds? She glanced over and smiled. Those are just scrapes. Kids bounce back from stuff like that. I filed this information away under possible enhanced healing factors and continued my observations. We reached the research facility where I'd be staying, a modest complex of laboratories and living quarters. Dr. Chen showed me to my room, helped me set up my equipment, and handed me a schedule of planned activities. Tomorrow we'll start with the History Museum, she said. I think you'll find human development patterns interesting. After that, we have a town hall meeting where you can observe our democratic processes, and in the evening, there's a community celebration. What type of celebration? Memorial Day. We honor our military veterans and remember those who died in service. This seemed like a perfect opportunity to study human death rituals and ancestor worship. Fascinating. How many veterans does a colony this size typically maintain? Dr. Chen paused, her hand on the doorframe. Well, nearly half our adult population has some form of military experience. I blinked in surprise, using both my primary and secondary eyelids. Half? But this is a civilian research colony, correct? Yes, but most humans serve in some military capacity during their youth. It's fairly common. After she left, I spent the evening reviewing coalition intelligence reports on humanity. The data was sparse, focused mainly on their technological capabilities and trade potential. Their military was mentioned only in passing, noted as technologically adequate but numerically insignificant compared to major galactic powers. There was one reference that puzzled me. A footnote about humans having an unusually active warrior culture for a spacefaring civilization, but no elaboration on what that meant. I activated my bioscanner's deep analysis mode and reviewed the readings I'd taken throughout the day. The humans I'd encountered showed several anomalous patterns. Their stress responses were severely dampened, their pain tolerance appeared abnormally high, and their threat assessment behaviors were almost non-existent. Either they had somehow evolved in an environment entirely free of danger, which seemed impossible, or they had some other adaptation I wasn't recognizing. The next morning, Dr. T6 Chan arrived early with two other humans she introduced as Dr. Marcus Webb and Captain Lisa Rodriguez.
Dr. Webb was elderly even by human standards, with gray hair and lines around his eyes that suggested advanced age. Captain Rodriguez was younger, with the bearing of someone accustomed to command. Captain Rodriguez is our security chief, Doctor, Chen explained, and Dr. Gostel said, Webb is our colony historian. They both volunteered to help with your research. I studied Captain Rodriguez with interest. Finally, a human with obvious military training.
She should provide insights into their combat capabilities and defensive strategies. But like Dr. Chen, she appeared remarkably relaxed and carried no visible weapons. Dr.
Zethrak, Captain Rodriguez said, extending her hand for the greeting ritual. Welcome to New Geneva. I hope you'll find your stay educational. Thank you, Captain. I'm particularly interested in learning about human security protocols. Your defensive arrangements seem quite minimal.
Dr. Webb chuckled, a sound that seemed to convey both amusement and something else. That's because our real defenses aren't the kind you can see, young man. We began our tour at the Historical Museum, a small building that housed artifacts and displays documenting human development. Dr.
Webb led us through exhibits showing the progression from early tool use to space travel, pointing out significant developments along the way.
The early section seemed unremarkable. Bipedal primates learning to control fire, developing agriculture, forming settlements. Standard evolutionary patterns I'd observed in a dozen other species.
But something began to shift as we moved through the timeline. This section covers what we call the classical period, Dr.
Webb said, gesturing to displays showing ancient human civilizations. Around this time, humans began organizing into larger political units and developing more sophisticated technologies. I examined artifacts behind protective barriers, metal tools, decorative items, fragments of written text.
But mixed in with the domestic items were other objects that made my sensory tendrils curl with unease. Weapons. Not just simple tools adapted for violence, but implements designed solely for killing other humans. Dr.
Webb, these appear to be weapons designed for intraspecies conflict.
Oh yes, he said casually. Humans have always been quite creative when it comes to warfare. But why would you develop weapons specifically for use against your own kind?
Dr. Webb and Captain Rodriguez exchanged a look I was beginning to recognize, that mixture of amusement and something darker. Dr.
Zethrak, Captain Rodriguez said gently. What do you know about human history? The basics. You achieved spaceflight approximately 200 years ago, established your first interstellar colonies 50 years later, and made contact with the Coalition 30 years ago.
And before spaceflight, I accessed my data files. The records are sparse. Some industrial development, primitive political systems, early technological advancement. Dr. Webb nodded slowly. That's accurate, as far as it goes. But it leaves out some rather important details. We moved to the next section, and I found myself staring at a display that made no sense.
The centerpiece was a scale model of some sort of vehicle, cylindrical, with fins and what appeared to be an explosive warhead.
Dr. Webb, what is this device? That's a nuclear missile, son. Intercontinental ballistic missile, to be specific. I studied the display more carefully. According to the placard, this weapon could travel thousands of kilometers and deliver an explosive yield equivalent to millions of tons of conventional explosives. I don't understand. This appears to be designed for destroying large areas rather than specific targets. That's correct. But what could possibly require such destructive capability? Doctor.
Webb was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried a weight that made my exoskeleton plates shift uncomfortably.
Other humans, Dr. Zethrak. We built those to kill other humans. The next display showed photographs. Images of destruction so complete that I initially thought they must be artistic renderings or perhaps documentation of natural disasters. Entire cities reduced to ash and rubble, landscapes transformed into barren wastelands. These are artistic representations? No, Captain Rodriguez said quietly. Those are historical photographs. The devices you just saw, we used them.
I stared at the images, my mind struggling to process what I was seeing.
Use them? Use them against your own species? Twice during what we call World War II, cities called Hiroshima and Nagasaki.
My bioscanner was detecting elevated stress hormones in my own system. This had to be some sort of misunderstanding.
But that would constitute genocide. It constituted the end of a war, Dr. Webb said.
A war that had already killed approximately 60 million humans. The number hit me like a physical blow. 60
In the entire recorded history of the Galactic Coalition, total military casualties from all conflicts combined didn't approach that figure. 60 million in a single conflict? Well, that was just the Second Global War. The first one killed about 20 million. I felt my legs becoming unsteady and had to lean against the display case.
Global wars? Dr. Chen stepped forward, her expression concerned.
Dr. Zethrak, are you all right? You're looking a little pale. I think I need to sit down. They led me to a bench, and Dr.
Chen produced a container of water. As I sipped it, trying to process what I'd just learned, Captain Rodriguez knelt beside me.
Dr. Zethrak, I think there might be some things about human history that your coalition briefings didn't cover. How many? I asked weakly. How many global conflicts have your species fought? Dr. Webb consulted his datapad. Well, that depends on your definition of global. If we're talking about conflicts that involved multiple continents and millions of casualties, I'd say at least 6 major ones in the past 3 centuries. But if we include regional conflicts, civil wars, and smaller-scale military actions, he paused, doing calculations. Probably several hundred significant wars in the past 1,000 years. The water container slipped from my grip and clattered on the floor. Several hundred? And that's just the ones we have good historical records for. I looked around the museum with new eyes. Every display, every artifact, every casual mention of human development now carried a different weight. This wasn't the story of a peaceful species slowly advancing toward civilization. This was the documentation of the most violent, warlike species in the known galaxy. And they lived right next door. Dr. Suber. Chen, I said, my voice barely steady. When you said this colony had unusual challenges lately, what exactly did you mean? The 3 humans exchanged another one of those looks. This time I recognized the emotion I'd been failing to identify. Anticipation. Well, Doctor, Chen said slowly, we've been having some trouble with raiders. Pirates, essentially. They've been hitting outer system colonies and demanding tribute. Have you contacted coalition security forces? Captain Rodriguez smiled, and for the first time since meeting these humans, I felt something I thought I'd never experience again. Pure, instinctive terror. Dr. Zethrak, she said gently, we don't need coalition security forces. But surely, against organized pirates, the last group that tried to raid New Geneva left 3 ships and 47 personnel behind. Dr. Webb said matter-of-factly, they won't be bothering anyone else. Left behind? Dead, Captain Rodriguez clarified. Very, very dead. I stared at these 3 humans, a scientist, a historian, and a security officer, and realized I had been fundamentally wrong about everything. They weren't soft, defenseless creatures who had somehow stumbled into space travel. They were predators of a type I had never imagined possible. Predators who smiled while they talked about killing. Predators who built museums to celebrate their history of violence. Predators who had looked at the most destructive weapons imaginable and thought, we can do better. And now they were part of the Galactic Coalition. Dr. Sumner, Chen, I said carefully, perhaps we should continue this tour another day. I think I need some time to process this information. Of course, she said, her expression returning to that warm, friendly demeanor. Culture shock is perfectly normal.
Why don't you rest up and tomorrow we can visit our engineering facilities? I think you'll find our manufacturing capabilities quite interesting.
As they walked me back to my quarters, I found myself studying every human we passed with new eyes, the children playing their games that were clearly combat training exercises. The casual way adults carried tools that could easily be weapons. The constant undercurrent of barely restrained violence that I had mistaken for peaceful energy. How had coalition intelligence missed this? How had we looked at humanity and seen harmless traitors instead of the most dangerous military force in the galaxy? And more terrifyingly, what were they planning to do with their membership in the coalition? That night, I sent my first report back to coalition headquarters. I tried to keep my language clinical and objective, but even reading my own words, I could hear the edge of panic creeping in. Initial observations suggest human cultural patterns differ significantly from preliminary reports. Recommend immediate review of security classifications and threat assessments. Humans appear to possess advanced military capabilities and extensive combat experience. Request guidance on appropriate research protocols.
I sealed the message and transmitted it on a priority channel, then lay down on my sleeping platform and stared at the ceiling. Outside, I could hear the sounds of New Geneva settling into evening. Conversations, laughter, the hum of machinery. Normal, peaceful sounds that now carried an undertone of menace. Somewhere in this colony were humans who had killed other humans. Who had looked at species-ending weapons and thought they were reasonable tools for conflict resolution, who had fought wars so destructive that they made coalition conflicts look like minor disagreements.
And tomorrow, they wanted to show me their manufacturing facilities. I closed my eyes and tried not to think about what kind of things a species like this might manufacture when they thought they were being friendly. The worst part wasn't the violence they were capable of. The worst part was how much they seemed to enjoy it. I woke the next morning to the sound of explosions. My emergency reflexes kicked in immediately, sending me rolling off my sleeping platform and against the wall while my bioscanner automatically activated threat detection mode. Through the vibrations in the floor, I could sense multiple detonations, rhythmic and purposeful.
The humans were under attack. I activated my emergency communicator, preparing to signal for coalition evacuation, when I heard something that made my sensory tendrils freeze.
Laughter. Human laughter, coming from just outside my window.
Cautiously, I raised myself up and peered through the transparent aluminum barrier. In the courtyard below, a group of human children were engaged in what appeared to be recreational explosion making.
They had small devices that produced bright flashes and loud bangs, and they were setting them off while adults watched with apparent approval. One of the adult humans noticed me at the window and waved cheerfully.
"Morning, Dr. Zethrak," she called out. "Sorry if the fireworks woke you up. The kids are practicing for tonight's celebration."
Fireworks. They had created explosive devices for entertainment. Of course they had. A knock at my door interrupted my contemplation of human recreational violence.
Dr. Chen entered with her usual warm smile, carrying a tray of what appeared to be food and a steaming beverage.
"Good morning. I brought you some coffee and pastries.
Thought you might want to try some authentic human breakfast foods." I studied the offering suspiciously.
After yesterday's revelations, I found myself questioning every aspect of human culture. What exactly is coffee? It's a mild stimulant derived from plant beans. We grind them up, add hot water, and drink the result. You consume stimulants recreationally? Well, yes. Coffee is pretty much essential for most humans in the morning. I made a note in my research files. Humans begin each day by consuming psychoactive substances. And the pastries? Sweetbread with various fillings. That one has fruit jam, and this one has a cream cheese mixture. I examined the food items with my bioscanner. They appeared safe enough, though significantly higher in refined sugars than standard coalition nutrition protocols would recommend. I took a cautious bite of the pastry. It was pleasant, sweet, with complex flavors and a satisfying texture. But as I consumed more, I noticed a subtle change in my metabolism. My energy levels increased, my sensory awareness sharpened, and I felt an unusual sense of well-being. "Dr. Chen, are you certain this food doesn't contain any psychoactive compounds?" She laughed. "Just sugar. Humans have a bit of a sweet tooth." Sugar.
They had taken a basic carbohydrate and refined it into a substance that produced measurable psychological effects. Then they had incorporated it into their daily food consumption as a matter of routine.
I was beginning to understand that everything humans did was more complex and more potentially dangerous than it initially appeared. "Shall we head over to the manufacturing district?"
"Dr. Delfrin Shafton Pro," Chen asked. "I think you'll find our production capabilities quite impressive. As we walked through New Geneva, I paid closer attention to the details I had missed the previous day. The architecture, while appearing simple, was actually quite sophisticated. Buildings were reinforced beyond what climate control would require. Street layouts provided excellent sightlines and multiple escape routes. Even the landscaping seemed designed to provide concealment opportunities. Dr. Chen, your urban planning appears quite advanced. Who designed the colony layout? Actually, it was a group project. We had input from engineers, architects, and several military consultants. Military consultants? For a civilian research colony? Well, you never know when you might need defensive positions.
We passed a group of humans engaged in what they called jogging. Apparently, they ran long distances voluntarily, for no purpose other than maintaining physical fitness. Several of them carried weights while running, and I noticed they were covering ground at speeds that would challenge most coalition species in emergency sprint situations.
One of the joggers stopped to greet Dr. Chen. He was breathing heavily but still managed to hold a conversation while his body processed the physical exertion. "Morning, Sarah. This your xenobiologist friend, Dr. Zethrak. Meet Tom Bradley."
Tom's one of our agricultural specialists. Tom extended his hand for the greeting ritual.
His grip was significantly stronger than Dr. Chen's, and I could detect elevated muscle density throughout his forearms.
Pleasure to meet you, Doctor. Hope you're enjoying your stay. Thank you. I'm curious about your exercise routine. Do all humans maintain such intensive physical conditioning? Tom looked puzzled. This is just my morning jog.
Nothing intensive about it. You appeared to be traveling at approximately 15 kilometers per hour while carrying additional mass. Yeah, I like to keep the pace up, though I wasn't carrying any extra weight. I activated my bioscanner discreetly and confirmed my readings. Tom's bone density was nearly double what coalition species considered normal. His muscle development suggested someone who regularly engaged in heavy labor or intensive training. And his cardiovascular efficiency was remarkable. Tom, Dr. Chen said, Dr. Zethrak is doing research on human culture and biology. Maybe you could explain how our agricultural systems work.
Sure thing.
We're using a combination of traditional farming and advanced hydroponics, growing enough food to support the colony and still have surplus for trade.
Do you utilize automation for harvesting and processing? Tom scratched his head.
Some, but we found that human labor is actually more efficient for a lot of tasks. Plus, we like the work.
Good exercise. After Tom continued his run, Dr. Sab
Chen led me toward a large complex of buildings that hummed with industrial activity. The manufacturing district was more extensive than I had anticipated, with multiple production lines and what appeared to be sophisticated equipment.
What do you produce here? I asked. Oh, a bit of everything. Consumer goods, replacement parts for colony infrastructure, some items for export to other human settlements. Quote, we entered the first building, where humans were working with various materials and tools. I immediately noticed several concerning elements.
The tools were exceptionally well made, built to much higher stress tolerances than typical civilian equipment. The materials being processed included several high-strength alloys and composite substances that could have military applications.
And the humans wielding this equipment did so with casual expertise that suggested extensive training. Dr. Chen, your manufacturing capabilities seem quite advanced for a research colony. We like to be self-sufficient. Never know when you might need to jury-rig something in a hurry. A human worker approached us, wearing protective gear that looked suspiciously like armor.
She removed her helmet, revealing a woman with short-cropped hair and the confident bearing I was learning to associate with human military personnel.
Dr. Chen, good to see you. This must be our coalition observer. Dr. Step Zethrak, meet Commander Jane Murphy. She oversees our industrial operations.
Commander Murphy's handshake was firm enough to make my exoskeleton creak slightly. Welcome to New Geneva, Doctor. First time working with humans?
Yes, Commander.
I'm finding the experience quite educational. I'll bet.
Care to see what we're working on today? She led us deeper into the facility, past workstations where humans were assembling complex devices with components I didn't recognize. The precision required for the work was remarkable, and yet these humans performed it while carrying on casual conversations and occasionally breaking into laughter.
We're running a batch of emergency supplies, Commander Murphy explained. Standard survival gear, really. Shelter materials, water purification systems, communication equipment. I examined one of the devices being assembled, a compact unit with multiple sensors and what appeared to be a transmission array.
This communication equipment seems quite sophisticated. Well, you never know when you might need to call for help from a long way away.
My bioscanner detected several electromagnetic signatures that didn't match any civilian communication protocols I was familiar with.
Commander, what frequency ranges does this equipment operate on? Commander Murphy and Dr. Chen exchanged one of their looks. Oh, pretty much all of them, Commander Murphy said casually. All of them.
They had built communication devices capable of operating across the entire electromagnetic spectrum. That level of capability suggested military-grade equipment designed for use in hostile environments where standard channels might be compromised.
We moved to another section where humans were working with materials that made my sensory tendrils retract instinctively. The substances appeared to be various forms of explosive compounds, handled with the same casual competence I'd observed everywhere else in this facility.
Dr. Chen, are those energetic materials? Mining supplies, she said cheerfully. New Geneva sits on some pretty rich mineral deposits, but we have to blast through a lot of rock to get to the good stuff. A young human technician looked up from his workbench. Morning, Dr.
Chen, want to see the new batch of seismic charges? Dr. Zethrak might find them interesting, Mike.
Mike held up a device roughly the size of my fist. These babies can punch through 30 meters of solid granite.
We've been tweaking the formula to get better penetration with less collateral damage. I stared at the device.
30 meters of granite. The explosive force required for that kind of penetration could level a small building. Mike, I said carefully, what exactly do you mine that requires such powerful charges? Oh, mostly rare earth elements for electronics manufacturing. Though we found some interesting crystalline formations that might have industrial applications.
And how did you learn to formulate such powerful explosives? Mike grinned. Trial and error, mostly.
Plus some tips from Commander Murphy she used to work in demolitions.
I turned to look at Commander Murphy, who was examining another explosive device with the expression of someone admiring fine artwork. You have experience with military demolitions? Army Corps of Engineers.
Spent 8 years blowing things up before I got into civilian manufacturing. 8 years. 8 years of professional training in destruction, now applied to mining operations and emergency supplies. We continued through the facility, and with each new section, I became more convinced that I was not observing civilian manufacturing.
These humans were producing military-grade equipment while maintaining the fiction that it was all for peaceful purposes. Communications gear that could penetrate any jamming attempt. Explosives that could breach fortified positions. Tools and vehicles built to specifications that far exceeded civilian requirements.
And they did it all while laughing and making casual conversation. Dr. Chen, I said as we exited the manufacturing complex. I'm curious about the decision-making process for production priorities. Who determines what equipment gets manufactured? We have a colony council that coordinates resource allocation. Pretty standard democratic process.
And this council includes military personnel.
Well, most of our council members have some military background. It's pretty common among humans who volunteer for frontier colonies.
Most of them. The civilian colony governed by former military personnel, producing equipment that could outfit a private army, while maintaining the appearance of a peaceful research station. I was beginning to suspect that New Geneva was not what it appeared to be. That afternoon, Dr.
Chen took me to observe the democratic process she had mentioned. The colony council meeting was held in a modest conference room, with approximately 20 humans seated around a large table.
The discussion topics seemed mundane enough initially: resource allocation, work schedules, trade agreements with other colonies. But as I listened more carefully, I began to notice unusual undertones.
The engineering team has finished the new sensor array, one council member reported. We now have complete coverage of all approach vectors within a 50-kilometer radius. Excellent, responded Captain Rodriguez. Any anomalous contacts since the last sweep? 3 vessels passed through the outer detection zone, but all followed standard shipping lanes and responded appropriately to navigation beacons. Sensor arrays.
Detection zones. Navigation beacons. This wasn't infrastructure for a research colony. It was a perimeter defense network. Another council member spoke up. The training exercise scheduled for next week is confirmed. All teams have reported ready status. Good. Dr. Chen, will your research guests be participating in the observation protocol? Dr. Six.
Chen glanced at me.
Dr.
Zethrak, would you be interested in observing some of our emergency response procedures? What type of emergency response?
Oh, just some evacuation drills and coordination exercises. Nothing too exciting.
Something in her tone made me suspect that nothing too exciting was a significant understatement. The meeting continued with discussions of supply distribution, maintenance schedules, and what they called community morale initiatives. But underneath the civilian terminology, I could detect the structure of a military organization. Everything was coordinated. Everything was planned. Everything was designed with efficiency and response capability in mind. These humans weren't colonists who had learned to defend themselves. They were soldiers who had learned to pretend to be colonists. After the meeting, I walked back to my quarters with my mind racing. Every observation, every detail, every casual comment was adding up to a picture that contradicted everything the coalition believed about humanity. We had been told they were a peaceful species with limited military capability. We had been wrong. These humans possessed advanced technology, sophisticated organization, and what appeared to be extensive combat training. They had built what looked like a civilian colony but functioned like a military outpost. They manufactured equipment under the guise of peaceful industry that could equip a private army.
and they did it all while maintaining perfect cover as harmless researchers and farmers. That evening, I received a response to my previous day's report.
The message was brief and somewhat dismissive. Dr. Zethrak, your initial observations appear to reflect cultural misunderstanding rather than genuine security concerns. Human military history, while extensive, represents historical patterns common to pre-spaceflight civilizations. Current human capabilities have been thoroughly assessed and pose no threat to coalition security. Continue standard research protocols.
Director Catholic Xenocultural Research Division 1 stared at the message in disbelief. Cultural misunderstanding? Had Director Catholic seen the explosive devices these humans considered mining equipment? Did he know about their perimeter defense networks and emergency response protocols?
I composed a more detailed report, including specific observations about manufacturing capabilities, military training, and organizational structure. I tried to convey the growing certainty that New Geneva was not what it appeared to be. But as I reviewed my own words, I realized how they would sound to coalition analysts sitting safely in their offices, millions of kilometers away from the humans themselves. Paranoid, alarmist, the product of an overactive imagination. How could I explain the feeling of watching humans casually handle explosive devices while discussing dinner plans? How could I convey the undertone of controlled violence that permeated every aspect of their society? How could I make them understand that we were dealing with a species that had weaponized every aspect of their existence while making it all look perfectly normal? A knock at my door interrupted my report writing.
It's
Dr. Chen entered, carrying another tray of food and that beverage they called coffee. Thought you might be getting hungry, she said. Tomorrow's the big day, Memorial Day celebration and community gathering.
Should give you some great insights into human social dynamics. Dr. Chen, may I ask you something directly? Of course. I chose my words carefully.
Is New Geneva actually a research colony? She was quiet for a long moment, studying my face with those two perceptive human eyes. Dr. Zethrak, what do you think New Geneva is?
I think it's a military outpost disguised as a civilian settlement.
To my surprise, she smiled. Not the diplomatic smile I'd grown accustomed to, but something more genuine. You know, you're the first coalition observer to figure that out. The admission hit me like a physical blow. So I'm correct? Partially. New Geneva is a research colony. We really are studying local geology, developing agricultural techniques, and conducting legitimate scientific research.
but
But we're also a forward observation post, a equipment testing facility, and a training ground for what you might call frontier specialists. I felt my exoskeleton plates shifting nervously.
Frontier specialists? Humans who specialize in establishing and maintaining colonies in challenging environments. Challenging how? Dr. Chen sat down across from me, her expression becoming more serious than I had seen it.
Dr. Zethrak, the galaxy is a dangerous place.
The Coalition has done an admirable job of maintaining peace among member species, but there are threats out there that your standard diplomatic protocols aren't equipped to handle. What kind of threats?
pirates.
Slavers, rogue, military groups.
Species that view diplomatic contact as an opportunity for conquest rather than cooperation. Surely Coalition security forces are well-trained and well-equipped for dealing with other Coalition members. But what happens when you encounter someone who doesn't play by Coalition rules, someone who views your attempts at peaceful negotiation as weakness to be exploited? I thought about the various conflicts documented in Coalition archives. They were remarkably civilized affairs, characterized by careful adherence to established protocols and minimal casualties. Even the most severe disagreements were resolved through mediation and compromise rather than direct military action.
Dr. Chen, are you suggesting that the Coalition's approach to conflict resolution is inadequate? I'm suggesting that the Coalition has been very fortunate to exist in a relatively peaceful region of space. She stood up and moved to the window, looking out at the colony lights in the gathering darkness. Dr.
Zethrak, how many species in the Coalition have actually fought for their independence? The question puzzled me. Fought for independence?
I don't understand. When your species first encountered another intelligent species, what happened? We established communication, exchanged cultural information, and negotiated trade agreements. And if that other species had been hostile, if they had viewed your homeworld as a resource to be exploited and your people as obstacles to be removed, I had never considered the possibility. The idea of one intelligent species attempting to destroy another seemed fundamentally irrational.
Dr. Chen, surely any species capable of interstellar travel would have developed beyond such primitive aggression.
She turned back to me, and in her expression I saw something that made my sensory tendrils curl with unease. Dr.
Zethrak, humans achieved interstellar travel while simultaneously maintaining the capacity to destroy our own planet multiple times over. Intelligence and wisdom are not the same thing. The implications of that statement were staggering. You're saying that technological advancement doesn't necessarily correlate with peaceful intentions? I'm saying that the universe is full of species that have learned to build starships without learning to control their darker impulses. And when the Coalition encounters one of those species, she paused, letting the implication hang in the air. That's when they call humans. I spent that night staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep despite the physical exhaustion from processing so much disturbing information. Every assumption I had made about the nature of galactic civilization was crumbling under the weight of human reality. The Coalition existed in a bubble of civilized behavior, protected by protocols and agreements that only worked because everyone involved chose to honor them. But what happened when someone chose not to play by those rules? What happened when the civilized galaxy encountered something genuinely dangerous? The answer, apparently, was that they called the humans. And tomorrow, I was going to observe a human Memorial Day celebration, a ritual honoring their military dead. I had a feeling I was about to learn exactly how many dead humans it took to keep the galaxy safe. The Memorial Day ceremony began at dawn with something humans called a moment of silence. 300 colonists gathered in New Geneva's Central Plaza, standing motionless as the twin suns crested the horizon. No words, no formal ritual, just absolute stillness while the morning light illuminated a monument I had somehow failed to notice before. It was a simple black stone pillar, perhaps 3 meters tall, covered with names etched in precise lettering. Thousands of names. As the silence stretched on, I began to comprehend the magnitude of what I was witnessing. These were their dead, not just the military casualties from conflicts I was beginning to understand, but specific individuals, real humans who had lived and died defending something these colonists considered worth dying for. Each name represented someone who had made the ultimate sacrifice for their species' survival. The silence ended when a young human stepped forward and began reading names aloud. Not all of them, that would have taken days, but a selected group that apparently held special significance for the colony. Sergeant Maria Santos killed in action during the Kepler incident. Lieutenant Commander John Chen lost with all hands during the defense of New Canberra. Colonel Sarah Washington gave her life holding the line at the Battle of Proxima Station. As each name was read, I noticed individual colonists reacting. A slight stiffening of posture, a brief closure of eyes, sometimes tears. These weren't just historical figures to these humans. They were people they had known. Friends, relatives, comrades. Dr. Chen stood beside me, her usual warmth replaced by something harder and more focused. When the name Lieutenant Commander John Chen was read, I saw her jaw tighten slightly. Dr. Chen, I whispered. Was Lieutenant Commander Chen related to you?
My older brother, she said quietly. He was killed defending a coalition research station from slavers 3 years ago.
The reading continued for nearly an hour. By the end, my bioscanner was detecting elevated stress responses from dozens of colonists. These humans were reliving personal losses, remembering trauma that would have required psychological counseling for most coalition species. But they stood straight, maintained their composure, and honored their dead with dignity that spoke to a culture intimately familiar with sacrifice. After the ceremony, the mood shifted dramatically. The humans began setting up for what they called a celebration. Food preparation areas appeared throughout the plaza. Musicians began tuning instruments, and children ran about with excited energy that contrasted sharply with the solemnity of the memorial service.
How do you transition so quickly from mourning to celebration?
I asked Dr. Chen as we watched the transformation taking place. We're not mourning, Dr.
Zethrak. There's a difference. Captain Rodriguez approached us, carrying a plate of food and wearing an expression I had learned meant she was about to share something significant. Dr. Zethrak, Dr. Chen mentioned you were interested in human military history. Among other things, yes. Would you like to meet some of our veterans? We have quite a few in the colony, and I think their perspectives might be valuable for your research. I agreed, though with considerable trepidation. After everything I'd learned about human military capabilities, I wasn't sure I was prepared for direct contact with professional human warriors.
Captain Rodriguez led me to a group of older humans gathered around one of the food preparation areas. They were engaged in animated conversation, laughing and sharing stories with the casual camaraderie I had observed throughout the colony. Everyone, I'd like you to meet Dr. Casado, Zethrak, our coalition observer. Dr. Zethrak, these are some of New Geneva's distinguished veterans. The introductions were casual and friendly, but as each human shared their background, I began to understand that I was in the presence of individuals with extraordinary combat experience. Master Sergeant Elena Vasquez had served in something called the Frontier Guard for 25 years, participating in operations across 17 different star systems. Her specialty was what humans termed asymmetric warfare, fighting against superior enemy forces, using unconventional tactics.
Commander David Kim had been a naval officer aboard human warships during what they called the Expansion Wars, conflicts I had never heard of that apparently involved defending human colonies from various hostile forces. Marcus Webb, the historian who had shown me through the museum, turned out to be a former intelligence officer who had spent 30 years gathering information about potential threats to human space. And sitting quietly at the edge of the group was an elderly human woman named Admiral Catherine Torres, who had commanded entire fleets during something called the corporate conflicts.
Admiral Torres, I said carefully. I'm not familiar with the corporate conflicts.
She smiled, but unlike the warm expressions I'd grown accustomed to from other humans, this one carried an edge of steel.
That's because they're classified at your clearance level, Doctor.
But I can tell you they were resolved successfully. Resolved how? Completely. Master Sergeant Vasquez laughed. Catherine doesn't like to talk about her glory days.
Too modest. There's nothing glorious about war, Admiral Torres said quietly. But there's honor in protecting those who can't protect themselves. Commander Kim leaned forward. Dr. Zethrak, what has your coalition told you about human military involvement in galactic affairs? I chose my words carefully. We were informed that humans have limited military capacity and have had minimal involvement in interstellar conflicts. The veterans exchanged looks that I was learning to interpret as significant communication among humans who shared dangerous knowledge. Limited military capacity, Dr. Webb repeated thoughtfully. That's an interesting phrase. Is it inaccurate? Admiral Torres set down her drink and gave me her full attention. Dr. Zethrak, are you familiar with the concept of force projection? I'm not certain what you mean. The ability to deploy military power far from your home territory to achieve political objectives. The coalition maintains peacekeeping forces, if that's what you're referring to. How many warships does the coalition have? I accessed my knowledge files. Approximately 200 vessels of various classifications distributed across member systems. And crew sizes? Typically 50 to 100 personnel per vessel. Admiral Torres nodded slowly. So roughly 15,000 military personnel for the entire coalition. That seems adequate for maintaining peace among civilized species. Dr. Zethrak, she said gently. The human colonial fleet maintains over 800 vessels with crew complements averaging 500 personnel each. The number hit me like a physical blow. 800 ships. 400,000 military personnel. The humans alone had a navy 25 times larger than the entire coalition force. But your colonies are spread across only a few dozen systems. Actually, we have confirmed settlements in over 300 systems, Commander Kim said, though not all of them are listed in coalition databases. 300 systems. The coalition comprised only 47 member worlds across 31 systems. How is that possible? Coalition surveys show most of the galaxy is unexplored. Master Sergeant Vasquez smiled grimly. That's because humans explore differently than coalition species. What do you mean? When the coalition encounters an unknown system, they send scientific survey vessels with minimal armament and peaceful intentions, Dr. Webb explained.
Very civilized approach. And humans?
We send scout ships designed to survive contact with hostile forces, Admiral Torres said. Because we learned early on that not everyone in the galaxy has peaceful intentions. I felt my understanding of galactic geography shifting dramatically.
Are you saying there are hostile species the coalition isn't aware of? Oh, you're aware of them, Master Sergeant Vasquez said. You just don't know they're hostile because they've never attacked coalition territory. Why not? The veterans looked at each other, and I could sense them making a collective decision about how much to reveal.
Because, Admiral Torres said quietly, they're too busy dealing with us. The implications of that statement were staggering.
You're saying humans are actively engaged in conflicts the coalition knows nothing about? We're saying humans are actively engaged in maintaining galactic stability,
Commander Kim corrected. The Coalition exists in a zone of peace because someone else handles the messy business of dealing with threats before they reach Coalition space.
Doctor, Chen approached our group, carrying a plate of food and wearing an expression that suggested she had been monitoring our conversation. Gentlemen, lady, I hope you're not overwhelming our guest with too much information.
Just sharing some perspective, Admiral Torres said.
Dr. Chen, I said, my voice barely steady. How long has this been going on? How long has what been going on? Human military operations protecting Coalition territory. She sat down beside me, her expression becoming serious.
Dr. Zethrak, do you remember what I told you about frontier specialists? You said they were humans trained for challenging environments. That's true as far as it goes, but the most challenging environments aren't planets with hostile weather or dangerous wildlife. What are they? Places where the only law is the one you can enforce yourself. Master Sergeant Vasquez leaned forward.
Doctor, you've spent your career studying dangerous predators. What's the most dangerous thing about a predator? I considered the question.
Their ability to kill prey species? Wrong. The most dangerous thing about a predator is that it makes other creatures afraid to leave their safe spaces.
A single apex predator can control territory hundreds of times larger than its actual hunting range, simply through the threat of its presence. I don't understand the relevance. Admiral Torres spoke up. The relevance, Doctor, is that humans have become the apex predators of this region of space. And just like predators in a natural ecosystem, our presence affects behavior patterns far beyond our actual territory. You're saying that hostile species avoid Coalition space because they fear human retaliation? We're saying that hostile species have learned through experience that attacking Coalition interests is inadvisable, Commander Kim said diplomatically.
What kind of experience? The veterans exchanged another one of their meaningful looks. The kind that leaves very clear lessons for survivors. Dr. Webb said finally. I was quiet for several minutes, trying to process what I was learning. The Coalition existed under human protection, maintained by human military force, defended by human soldiers who operated in regions of space we didn't even know existed. We were not partners in galactic civilization. We were clients under human protection. Dr. Chen, I said finally, does the Coalition leadership know about this arrangement? Some of them do, the ones with sufficient security clearance. And they're comfortable with it? They're comfortable with continued existence, Admiral Torres said bluntly. Which is what we provide. As the afternoon progressed, I learned more about the scope of human military operations. The veterans shared stories, carefully edited for security purposes, about conflicts with species I had never heard of. Slavers who harvested sentient beings for labor. Raiders who viewed peaceful colonies as convenient sources of supplies. Military powers that considered diplomatic contact an opportunity to scout for invasion targets. The humans had encountered all of these threats and dealt with them using methods that would horrify Coalition leadership. Complete destruction of enemy military capabilities. Preemptive strikes against potential threats. Psychological warfare designed to discourage future aggression. Military solutions that prioritized effectiveness over ethics. Dr. Zethrak, Master Sergeant Vasquez said as the day wound down. Do you understand why New Geneva exists? I'm beginning to. It's not just a research colony. It's not just a military outpost. It's a demonstration. A demonstration of what? Human capabilities. Admiral Torres said, every Coalition species that sends observers here learns the same thing you're learning. That humans are capable of levels of violence that most civilized species can't even imagine. And that knowledge influences Coalition policy? It ensures that Coalition leadership makes informed decisions about humanity's role in galactic affairs. Commander Kim stood up, stretching in the manner humans employed to relieve physical tension. Doctor, you came here to study human culture. What have you concluded? I thought about everything I had observed over the past 3 days. The casual competence with weapons and explosives. It's an essence that follows. The military organization disguised as civilian administration. The advanced manufacturing capabilities producing equipment that could outfit armies. The veterans whose stories revealed conflicts spanning hundreds of star systems. I've concluded that humanity is the most dangerous species in the known galaxy.
And? Dr.
Chen prompted. And that everyone else's survival depends on staying on your good side. Admiral Torres nodded approvingly.
Very good, Doctor. You learned quickly. But I have one more question. Yes? What happens if something emerges that even humans can't handle?
The veterans were quiet for a long moment. When Admiral Torres finally spoke, her voice carried a weight that made my exoskeleton plates shift nervously.
Dr. Zethrak, do you know why we call ourselves the Human Colonial Fleet instead of the Human Interstellar Navy? I assumed it reflected your role in establishing colonies.
No, we call ourselves the Colonial Fleet because our mission isn't conquest or expansion.
What is it? Defense. Everything we do, every ship we build, every weapon we develop, every soldier we train, it's all preparation for the day when something shows up that threatens not just human space but all intelligent life in the galaxy.
Do you have reason to believe such a threat exists?
Doctor, she said quietly, human space extends in a sphere roughly 400 light-years in diameter. Coalition space sits at the center of that sphere, in the safest region we've been able to establish. And beyond human space. Beyond human space, there are things that make our worst enemies look like minor annoyances. The celebration continued around us. Music, laughter, children playing games. But I could no longer perceive it as innocent festivity.
These humans were celebrating their ability to protect not just themselves but every other intelligent species they had encountered. They were celebrating their role as the galaxy's guardians. And they were preparing for threats that hadn't arrived yet. That evening I sent my final report to Coalition headquarters.
This time, I didn't try to moderate my language or soften my conclusions. Director Kallax, human military capabilities exceed Coalition estimates by several orders of magnitude.
They maintain active defense operations across approximately 300 star systems, operating fleet elements estimated at 800-plus vessels with 400,000-plus personnel. Human colonies function as military outposts maintaining security buffer zone around Coalition space.
Recommend immediate review of human status within Coalition structure. We are not their equals. B. We are their protégés. Additional recommendation. Current research protocols inadequate for assessing human capabilities. Future observers should be informed they are studying galaxy's dominant military power, not peaceful trading partners. Personal note. I have learned what true terror really means. It's not the fear of being killed by monsters. It's the realization that the only thing protecting you from monsters is something even more terrifying. End report. I transmitted the message, then sat back to contemplate my situation.
Tomorrow, I would leave New Geneva and return to Coalition space, where I would brief my colleagues on human culture and capabilities. How could I explain what I had learned? How could I convey the reality of humanity's role in galactic affairs? How could I make them understand that our peaceful civilization existed only because humans had chosen to make it possible?
A knock at my door interrupted my thoughts. Dr. Justice's aunt.
Chen entered carrying a final tray of food and that ubiquitous beverage they called coffee. Thought you might want something before you leave tomorrow, she said.
Dr. Chen, may I ask you one last question?
Of course.
Why do you do it?
Why do humans take responsibility for protecting species you barely know? She was quiet for a long moment, settling into the chair across from me. Dr. Zethrak, do you have children? My species reproduces through collective genetic contributions.
I have participated in several spawning cycles. Do you feel protective toward the young that result from those cycles? Of course. They represent the future of my species. Humans feel that way about intelligence itself.
Every sentient species we encounter represents something precious, a unique perspective, a different way of understanding the universe, a form of consciousness that has never existed before and will never exist again. Even species you've never met, especially species we've never met.
Every civilization that gets snuffed out by slavers or raiders or conquest-minded empires is a loss to the entire galaxy. So you fight to preserve diversity. We fight to preserve the possibility of diversity. The chance for new species to evolve, for existing species to develop, for intelligence to flourish in forms we can't even imagine yet. I sipped the coffee, noting how the mild stimulant helped me process complex thoughts more clearly.
Dr. Chen, are humans capable of losing? Of encountering something they can't defeat? Of course. We're not gods, Doctor.
Zethrak, we're just very good at organized violence.
And if that day comes?
She smiled, but this time the expression carried something I had never seen from a human before, genuine sadness.
If that day comes, we'll make sure it's expensive.
We'll buy time for other species to run, to hide, to develop defenses we couldn't provide. You would sacrifice yourselves for species you've never met? Dr.
Zethrak, that's what we do every day. The next morning, as the transport ship Harmony's voice arrived to take me home, I stood on the landing pad looking back at New Geneva with completely different eyes. It wasn't a research colony. It wasn't a military outpost. It wasn't a demonstration of human capabilities, it was a promise.
A commitment from one species to all the others that intelligence would be protected, diversity would be preserved, and the darkness between the stars would not be allowed to consume the light of consciousness. Captain Vorlax greeted me with his usual casual demeanor.
How was your stay with the humans, Dr. Zethrak?
Burn anything interesting? I look back at the colony one last time, where humans were already beginning their daily routines, running their explosive mining operations, manufacturing their emergency supplies, conducting their emergency response drills. Yes, Captain, I learned what it means to stand with humans.
And what's that? I secured my equipment and settled into my seat for the journey home. It means discovering that the scariest monsters in the galaxy are the ones protecting you from all the others.
As we lifted off, I thought about the report that was already making its way through coalition intelligence networks and the conversations that would soon be taking place in government offices across dozens of worlds. Some officials would dismiss my findings as the fantasies of an overwrought researcher.
Others would demand immediate policy changes to address the implications of human military dominance. A few would understand the most important truth I had learned. Humanity had not asked to join the galactic community as equals. They had accepted responsibility for its survival, and standing with humans meant accepting that your continued existence depended on the goodwill of the most effective killers the galaxy had ever produced.
The terrifying thing wasn't that they could destroy us all. The terrifying thing was how grateful we should be that they had chosen not to.
Standing with humans taught me what true terror really is. HFY.